Chapter 41. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. A streak of bright red on the neckline _1 translator. 549690339. No matter how much Ning Qin guessed, she could not guess what he was thinking. So he came back just to do that kind of thing for Ying Luo. She had been deliberately avoiding and not thinking too much about this matter. She also hoped that he would not have such thoughts. After all, he did not lack women. But it turned out that this day would still come. The corners of Ning Qin's eyes were sour and bitter. "I'm not feeling well," she tried to find an excuse. "The medical report says that all the indicators of your body are normal." He had even thought of this. Ning Qin smiled bitterly. Her heart that had been beating violently earlier had calmed down, as if she was already dead. She strode over to the bed, step by step. She lifted a corner of the blanket and slept on it. He leaned forward and blocked the light above his head. Ning Qin could not see his face clearly. Her pale lips opened and closed. Finally, she said, "Can you turn off the light?" Nian Lai's eyes stung, darkness surging in them. He stretched out his long hand and the light went out. In the dark, Ning Qin could not see him. She could only feel his presence. When his warm breath landed on her face, she trembled and said in a sobbing tone, "I don't want to get pregnant." As soon as she finished speaking, her hot lips took her breath away. They turned, and attacked. His iron arms pressed on her shoulders. She was in pain, but she endured it and didn't make a sound. A long time passed. The quick and domineering kiss made Ning Qin lose her consciousness. However, he rolled down from her body and hugged her tightly with his arms, as if he was fused into her body. She turned her back to him, opened her mouth, and took deep breaths. Behind her, the man's words on the phone were drowned out by her deafening heartbeat. He hung up the phone, got up, and put on his clothes. Looking at her back, Nian Lai's deep eyes turned dark and difficult to look at. "I have something to do, so I'm going out." There was no response. He buttoned his sleeves, put on his suit, and no longer hesitated. The door closed and the person left. Ning Qin covered her mouth and panted. The sound of a car starting up came from downstairs, and she was sure that he had really left. She sat up on the bed. The bath towel was half worn, revealing her beautiful figure. Ning Qin stared out of the window in the dark. Her long eyelashes were like butterfly wings, trembling with nervousness and panic, as well as a trace of joy for surviving the disaster. Other than kissing. He did not touch her. Even though she could clearly feel his eagerness. Did he feel pity for her? For the first time, Ning Qin had doubts about Nian Lai. But it was only for an instant. She lay down again and closed her eyes to sleep. Ning Qin had thought that Nian Lai's words that day were just a passing remark. However, ever since that day, he would come home every night, apply medicine for her in silence, and sleep with her. He would kiss her, and only kiss her. Even when he was in the heat of the moment, he would rush into the bathroom to take a shower, and when he came back, he was covered in cold air. Ning Qin didn't understand his way of doing things, and he never said much to her. Gradually, her resistance from the beginning became numb and submissive. That night, he returned home as usual. The two of them didn't say a word. He undid his tie and shirt and went into the bathroom. Ning Qin picked up the clothes on the ground, and his phone fell out of his suit pocket. She bent down to pick it up and a call came in. The caller ID showed that it was by Qingqing. Ning Qin's lips twitched. She walked to the bathroom door and knocked. The sound of water stopped. The man's unique hoarse voice sounded. "What's the matter?" "Your phone." Ning Qin answered honestly. There was a pause inside. "You don't have to worry about it." Ning Qin's eyes drooped as she said, "Okay." She turned around and put her phone on the coffee table, then continued to pick up the clothes scattered on the ground. The phone went off. Ning Qing picked up the tie and touched the shirt. A bright red stain on her collar entered her line of sight. Chapter 42. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. You were so passionate to me when you were young. 1. ENVE Translator. 549690339. Her fingertips were cold. Ning Qing stared at the red. She touched it with her finger and confirmed that it was indeed a lipstick mark. The cell phone on the coffee table rang again, showing the stubbornness of the person on the other side. Ning Qing turned around and walked to the coffee table. It was still Bai Qingqing. The bright red burned Ning Qing's eyes. She didn't know what she was thinking, but she pressed the answer button as if she were possessed. Young master, why aren't you here yet? It's almost 10 o'clock, if you still don't come, I'm going to be angry, the kind of Luo that needs 10 kisses to calm down. The woman's artificial voice came, and the shirt in Ning Qing's hand was crumpled into a ball. He's taking a shower. Call me back later, Ning Qing said coldly. Bai Qingqing was clearly surprised. Ning Qing. It's me. The other side fell silent. Ning Qing's face was expressionless. Miss Bai, you're seducing my husband so blatantly. Don't you think you're being too disrespectful? Bai Qingqing had called Nian many times over the past few days, but no one picked up almost every time. She was already in a bad mood, and now that she had to face Ning Qing, she exploded with anger. Who's your husband? Don't tell me he's young. Bai Qingqing smiled dazzlingly. Ning Qing, everyone in the circle knows that when you were young, you never confirmed your identity. I really don't know where you get your confidence from. Ning Qing's breathing became light. The law. Bai Qingqing wasn't annoyed. Since you were able to get his phone, did he allow you to pick up my call? Ning Qing froze. From her silence, Bai Qingqing was able to determine the answer to her question. Has the young man been going home a lot recently? She asked again. But not long after he came back, he would leave you behind and rush out again. Ning Qing's heart tightened unconsciously. How did you know? Bai Qingqing's probing was successful. She chuckled. Because he came to see me. I was injured on set and my wound hurts, especially at night. I can't sleep without someone to accompany me. When I was young, my heart ached for me, so I came to coax me to sleep every night. Ning Qing's voice was so low that it could barely be heard. Luo, you guys met today too? Of course. Bai Qingqing said shyly, you were so passionate towards me when you were young. You even rubbed off my lipstick. The meaning of her words was self-evident. At that moment, Ning Qing felt that she was a fool. She thought that since he came back every day, he would be with her every day. In the past few days, she even thought that since she couldn't escape, she might as well just live on the spot. However, a few days later, he had shattered her unrealistic fantasy. A man who doesn't have you in his eyes will have an affair no matter day or night. So what if he really likes you? Ning Qing took a deep breath, her tone full of sarcasm and arrogance. Whether he loves me or not, he will come back to me. The woman in front of her was angry. Ning Qing, I advise you to have some dignity. The shameless person is you. You're not liked by your parents and you've caused your sister's death. Now, you're still occupying the position that belongs to your sister. Ning Qing, doesn't your conscience hurt? Can't you see that Ning Su's ghost is following you all day? Ning Qing's heart had been stabbed, and blood was flowing non-stop. Her face was as cold as ice. My sister won't be able to rest in peace if an unruly woman like you takes her position. Bai Qingqing suddenly laughed. If she sees you like this, she might really die with a grievance. Your most beloved sister is with the murderer who killed her. Do you think your sister can be at ease? Chapter 43. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. I don't love you, so there's nothing to think about. Translator 549690339. Ning Qing's eyes shot open, and all the blood in her body froze as she spoke. The clothes in her arms fell. She grabbed her phone with both hands and asked in disbelief, "By Qingqing, what did you say just now?" NBSP, on the other end, the woman seemed to be deliberately keeping her in suspense. I'm sorry. I said the wrong thing. I was wrong. Please don't take it to heart. What do you know? Ning Qing knew that she might be deliberately trying to sow discord, but she could not help but ask. What you know, I know. Your sister used to be in love with the youngster and their relationship has always been good. If it wasn't for you, she wouldn't have died. Their child would be a few years older by now. Isn't that what you think, Jinjin? By Qingqing, don't play riddles with me. You Qingqing. The phone in her hand was snatched away. Ning Qing turned around and saw Nian Yu's frosty face. She couldn't make a sound. All the explanation seemed to be pale and weak. Nian Lai glanced at the screen and hung up without hesitation. Ning Qing subconsciously wanted to stop him, but her eyes met his dark, surging eyes. Her lips moved, and her chest was heavy, but she pretended to be calm. I'm sorry, she said. She thought he would get angry, but the man only walked past her and stopped in front of the closet. A few days ago, he had asked someone to hang his clothes together with hers. The suit shirt and her skirt looked warm and beautiful together. Ning Qing's heart ached as she watched him pick out clean clothes. She had mixed feelings. She clearly knew that she had gotten into the car accident with Ning Su, and even her parents had said so. There was nothing suspicious about it. But when she heard Bai Qingqing say such ridiculous things, she actually had a moment of despicable hope that it was true. However, Nian Lai loved Ning Su so much. How could he have caused them to get into a car accident? This was simply impossible. Her rationality returned, and her emotions settled down. Ning Qing knew that he was angry. Are you going to see her again? Ning Qing could not help but ask when he was about to leave. Nian Lai's handsome brows furrowed. She just told me that you've been going out every night to accompany her. You believe me? Nian Lai asked. Ning Qing bent down and picked up the clothes that were scattered by her feet. I mean, be it his attitude towards Bai Qingqing earlier or the lipstick on his clothes, it was clear that he cared a lot about that woman. She had no choice but to believe it. Nian Lai saw through her thoughts, his expression dark and hard to read. Nian Lai, do you really like Jinjin? Ning Qing asked softly. He turned around. Under the light, she looked very serious. His thin lips were tightly pursed, and it was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. If you think it's love, then it is. Ning Qing hugged the pile of clothes in her arms tightly and placed them on the sofa. If you're just toying with her, that's another matter. But Nian Lai, if you really like her, there's no need for you to keep her by your side. Everyone in this world has to work hard to live. If my sister knew, she would hope that you would live well. What do you think? Nian Lai suddenly asked. Ning Qing was obviously stunned. He looked at her, her small figure reflected in his dark eyes. It has nothing to do with your sister. If I really get together with another woman, Ning Qing, what would you think? A long silence. He stood there, lonely and stubborn, waiting for her answer. At that moment, Ning Qing had almost thought that he liked her. The illusion made her feel ridiculous, and she shook her head in mockery. I don't love you, so there's nothing to think about. Chapter 44. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Young master was afraid of affecting you, so he cleared this floor _1 translator. 549690339. He did not love her. What was love and what was not love? Ning Qing stood on the balcony, the image of her saying that she didn't love him that night lingering in her mind. Her eyes were as deep as the lake, and her expression was so calm that it made one feel sad. Why did he show such an expression? And for the first time, he didn't get angry or scold her when she talked back to him. Ning Qin could not understand his reaction. Ever since that day, her heart had been in a mess, like a mess that could not be sorted out. The cell phone in the room rang. Ning Qin returned to her senses and went in. It was a call from the hospital. He was afraid that she had to go for a check-up. "Hello," he said. "Hello, Miss Ning. It's time for your second physical examination. May I know if you're free in the next 2 days?" "Sure enough. I'm sorry, I have some private matters to attend to these few days," Ning Qin declined. "That's fine, Ing Luo." The other party was still very polite, but he suddenly stopped. There seemed to be some other sound inside. Ning Qin frowned. When the other party spoke again, he had changed his tone. "The physical examination won't take too long. You can find time to come over. I don't think I have a problem with it now." Ning Qin still refused. "There are some problems that you can't feel yourself. You'd better come over for a check-up to make sure you're fine. Come over at 3 in the afternoon. I've already made an appointment with Dr. Lu." The call ended. Ning Qin felt a little uncomfortable, but she didn't think too much about it. At 2 in the afternoon, she changed her clothes and went downstairs. When she saw Lu Jui waiting in the living room, she seemed to have understood something. "Young madam, I'm here to take you to the hospital," Lu Jui said respectfully. As expected. Her every move was under Nian Lai's control. He even had the final say on whether her body was in good health or whether she needed to go for a checkup. Ning Qin's expression was numb. He seemed to be smiling, but also seemed not to be smiling. They left the house, got into the car, and went to the hospital. At Jiahua Hospital. The lobby of the hospital was packed with people. Lu Jui protected Ning Qin as they got into the elevator and went to the 7th floor. The difference was that there was no one on the 7th floor. "Young master was afraid that other people would disturb you, so he cleared this floor," Lu Jui said. Was he afraid of affecting her? NBSP, he was probably afraid that her identity would be exposed and that it would cause him more trouble. Ning Qin sneered in her heart as she walked into Dr. Lu's consultation room. A woman in her 30s was sitting in front of the table, looking at the medical record on the computer. 2 female nurses stood beside her. She quickly stood up when she saw Ning Qin enter. This person was Dr. Lu, the doctor in charge of Ning Qin's condition since she fell into a coma. Ning Qin felt a sense of familiarity when she saw the doctor who had worked hard to help her recover. She hooked up a smile. "Imperial Physician Lu, please." "Mrs. Nian, you're here." Ning Qin's smile suddenly froze. The woman walked in front of her. She didn't have the gentleness she had before. Instead, she wanted to help her but didn't dare to. "Please take seat," she said eagerly. Ning Qin followed her lead and sat down at the table. Dr. Lu smiled and glanced at Lu Jui who was beside her. "Mr. Lu has already told me about your recent situation. It looks like you're recovering well." The light in Ning Qin's eyes dimmed a little. "I'm all right." Dr. Lu observed her expression and asked, "Have you been unhappy recently? How are you feeling?" Ning Qin lowered her eyes. Lu Chao took a step forward. "There's no need to ask these questions. Let's just give my madam a checkup." Chapter 45. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In those 2 years, the money spent on her was all given by Nian Sun. 1. Translator 549690339. Dr. Lu smiled awkwardly. He was a little afraid of his existence. "Please follow me." Ning Qin stood up and followed her into the room. During the entire examination, other than the necessary instructions, neither Dr. Lu nor the two nurses who assisted her said a word. It was a normal examination, but it was so depressing that it was hard to breathe. Lu Zhui was telling Dr. Lu about the results of her examination. Ning Qin took the opportunity to say, "I'm going to the bathroom." Then, she escaped. The corridor on this floor was empty, without a single person. Ning Qin washed her hands and walked to the stands. The crowd below was surging, and it was very lively. In comparison, her surroundings were pitifully deserted. "Hey, was that really the young madam of the Nian family?" A low voice resounded. Ning Qin leaned against the railing of the grandstand, most of her body blocked. She listened to the approaching footsteps and then turned into the bathroom. What else? Didn't you see that the entire floor was cleared? TSK, these rich people are too much. They made such a big scene and thought it was some serious illness. In the end, they just came for a physical examination. Her words were really sour. Another nurse said, "I don't know about that. The richer you are, the more you care about your health. If your health is bad, you'll be dead long ago. Who will spend so much money on?" Ning Qin breathed lightly, and their voices disappeared. After a while, there was the sound of running water in the sink next to him. "By the way, the young madam of the Nian family is really pretty." The other voice continued, "He's good looking, but his body is too weak." "What do you mean by that?" The woman lowered her voice and said, "She has been lying in our hospital's VIP ward for more than 2 years. She only woke up a few days ago. Today's examination showed that Dr. Lu doesn't look too good. I guess she has too many problems and it's hard to explain." The woman was surprised. "Ah. Was she in a vegetative state before? You don't even know this. Then I'll tell you something else, but don't tell anyone else, Ing Luo." The woman was anxious. She tugged at her hand and urged her. "I won't tell anyone. Hurry up and tell me." When Ning Qin was admitted to the hospital, she wasn't even 20 years old. In other words, she hadn't married Nian Lai at that time. After Nian Zhu married her, there were rumors that her family had used some method to get a vegetable to marry into the Nian family. They said that the young man had no feelings for her. But all the old nurses in our hospital know that it was Youngling who sent her to the hospital. In those 2 years, she received the best treatment in our hospital, and all the expenses were paid by Youngling. Boom! Ning Qin froze on the spot as if she had been hit in the head. They hadn't even gotten married, and Nian Lai had already admitted her to the hospital. And all the money she spent from the start was his. How could this be possible? Ning Qin couldn't believe it, and the coldness rose from the bottom of her feet. She quickly walked to the 2 nurses who were still talking. "Is what you said true?" The 2 of them didn't expect someone to suddenly appear, and it was the person they were talking about. They were so scared that they instantly took a few steps back. "We're sorry, Zhenzhen." "Miss Ning, no, it's Mrs. Nian. We didn't mean to talk about you behind your back." "Our Zhenzhen." Ning Qin clenched her fists. Her face was pale. She gritted her teeth and asked, "Let me ask you. Is what you just said true?" The nurse's body trembled like a sieve. "I only heard it from others." "Who told you that?" "She used to be a nurse. She's resigned now." Chapter 46. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He had become her savior. 1. Translator 549690339. Ning Qin's head was spinning. The sudden news caught her off guard. Her parents had never mentioned anything about what happened after she was hospitalized, and she had always silently acknowledged that her parents were the ones who were trying their best to keep her alive. But it turned out that it was not like that. The man that she wanted to escape from and was afraid of had become her savior in the end. The 2 of them were on the verge of tears when they saw how devastated she looked. I'm sorry, Mrs. Nian. We really didn't mean to do it. Please don't file a complaint against us. We can't lose this job, they said. As she spoke, she was about to slip and fall to the ground. Ning Qing felt cold all over. The suffocating and dull pain wrapped around his heart, making it hard for him to breathe. She closed her sorrowful eyes and said to the two, "You guys can leave." The two of them looked at each other for a few seconds, then said, "Thank you," and ran away. Ning Qing stood there for a long time, her complicated and indescribable emotions almost impossible to calm down. She walked numbly to the consultation room. Inside the room, Dr. Lu's expression was serious. She was looking at Lu Zhui's phone screen. The man's well-defined face could be vaguely seen. She's not in good health now. Whether it's because of the past few years in the hospital bed or the incident in the past, it's undeniable that her physical condition is getting worse and worse. It's not suitable for her to get pregnant in the next year. On the other end, the man was silent for a few seconds before saying something. Dr. Lu looked troubled. If you have such an idea, you have to take care of Madame's body, but I can't guarantee that it will work. You know, the chances of her getting pregnant are very low. Ning Qing grabbed the door handle and pushed the door open. His voice stopped abruptly. Her gaze swept across Lu Zhui and Dr. Lu's faces, and finally stopped at Lu Zhui's hand. What are you guys talking about? She appeared too calm, but her bright eyes seemed to see through everything. Dr. Lu smiled unnaturally. Mr. Nian is concerned about you, so he called me to ask about your condition. Ning Qing stepped forward and stood in front of Dr. Lu. She looked at the man in the video call, her long eyelashes trembling badly. Aren't you busy? Through the screen, Ning Qing could see Nian Lai's hand slightly bent on the table. The expensive watch on his wrist reflected a cold light, just like the one he had. I just finished a meeting, he said. Ning Qing suppressed her emotions and nodded. I'm done with the examination. I'll be back soon. Nian Lai was surprised to see her calm and composed. However, he did not ask further. Yes. Someone knocked on the office door, and the assistant said something about the schedule. Ning Qing heard him and looked at him. You can go. Nian Yu's eyes darkened. Seeing that she was about to end the call, he moved his lips. I'll be back for dinner tonight. Ning Qing's fingers stopped in the air. After a long while, a single word came out of her mouth. All right, he said. The call ended. Sir and Madam have such good relationship. Dr. Lu could not help but tease. Ning Qing's eyes were dull and she did not answer. Young madam, we should go back, Lu Zhui said to Ning Qing after pocketing his phone. Ning Qing nodded. The two of them walked out. Dr. Lu sent them to the elevator. Ning Qing suddenly remembered what the nurse had said. She was in poor health. How bad was it? So bad that she herself was not worthy to know. Reaching out to stop the elevator door from closing, Dr. Lu screamed, but Ning Qing was very calm. She looked at her with her bright eyes. Dr. Lu, you still haven't told me what the results of my examination are. Chapter 47. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Miss Bai said that she would like to see you tonight. 1. Translator 549690339. As a doctor, he was used to the cold and indifferent world and had experienced life and death for a long time. However, the expression on his face was stiff at this moment. As the elevator could not be closed, the alarm sounded. Ning Qing looked straight at her, as if she would not give up until she got an answer. Dr. Lu's smile was a little indescribable. After a little hesitation, he said, Madam, you're recovering well, but your body is still much weaker than before. I suggest that you go back and eat more nourishing meals to nourish your body. In addition, you should do some activities and exercise to maintain a good mood. Your body will slowly get better. Ning Qing stared at every inch of her face, and she could not see any trace of lying. She moved her lips. Thank you. Sorry for the trouble. This is what I should do. After nodding at her, Ning Qing retracted her hand. The elevator door slowly closed. Lu Jue and Dr. Lu's eyes met for a second before they were separated by the elevator door. He went downstairs and returned to the car. Lu Jue sat in the driver's seat and received a message on his phone. He fastened his seatbelt and looked down to see that it was a message from Nian Lai. How was she? Lu Jue glanced at the rearview mirror. Ning Qing was sitting in the back seat, looking out of the window with her clear and bright eyes. He quietly raised his hand, took a picture from below, and sent it over. Pay attention to her emotions. Yes. The car drove onto a wide road. Madam, do you want to go down for a walk? Lu Qinxiang asked after a while. Ning Qing looked at him. The doctor said that you need to maintain good mood, Lu Jue said. So, if there's anything you want to do, you can do it now. Ning Qing's heart felt like it had sunk to the bottom of the sea, suffocating her so much that she could not breathe. Let's find a supermarket, she said. There's one up ahead. After parking the car by the side of the road, Ning Qing and Lu Jue entered the supermarket. She went straight to the fresh vegetables area. Although Lu Jue was puzzled, he didn't ask much. Is there anything he doesn't like to eat? Ning Qing asked. Tilting her head. Lu Jue was stunned for a moment before he realized that she was talking about Nian Lai. No, no. Young master is not a picky eater. Ning Qing hummed in acknowledgement and began to pick up the dishes seriously. On the other hand, in the president's office on the top floor of the Nian Corporation, Nian Lai lowered his eyes and stared at the documents in front of him. He didn't move for a long time. Mr. Nian. Nian Junting's assistant stood at the side with the documents in his arms for a long time. He suppressed his surprise and reminded Nian Junting, Mr. Nian. Nian Lai's eyes gradually focused, and he coldly glanced at him. The assistant quickly said, You still have an online meeting later. You have a social gathering at 5 in the afternoon. The other party is a partner handpicked by the chairman. He'll be here at 8. Nian Lai's forehead twitched as he listened. He pinched the bridge of his nose and coldly ordered, Push it off. The assistant's mouth was wide open. For someone who was in the company 350 days a year, this was really surprising. Miss Bai just called and said that she would like to see you tonight. Nian Lai closed his eyes, obviously not wanting to say anything more. Noel. And the assistant shivered and lowered his head, not looking at him anymore. I understand. After the man left, Nian Shi opened her eyes. The room was filled with layers of ice. After Ning Qing and Lu Jue had finished selecting their dishes, they returned to Yunhuang No. 1. She didn't even take a break. She carried the things into the kitchen, took out the dishes, rolled up her sleeves, and began to wash. Lu Jue saw this from outside the door and wanted to help. Young madam, let me handle these things, Jinjin. Ning Qing blocked him with her elbow. No need. Lu Jue could do nothing to her as she wanted him to do it. Ning Qing turned her back to him. If you're busy, go ahead. I don't need anyone to guard me. Chapter 48. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Don't force yourself if you don't know how to do it. 1. Translator. 549690339 Ingluo is. Lu Jue left. Ning Qing glanced at the prepared dishes, processed the fish a little, and put it aside. She then took out the pan and boiled some oil. Half a pot of oil was boiling, and the bottom of the pot was bubbling with golden light. Ning Qing turned on the hood, and the rumbling sound made her unable to hear anything outside. Looking at the pot with the right temperature, she picked up the fish tail with one hand and slowly put it in the oil. She wasn't very good at cooking, and she had only begun to slowly practice her cooking skills since she had been brought here after she woke up. Ning Qing had never cooked something that required a little more cooking skills like sweet and sour carp. Therefore, when she heard the sound of frying in the oil pan, she couldn't help but feel afraid. Her body shrank back, but her back suddenly bumped into the person's chest. Ning Qing screamed and retracted her hand. The fish completely rolled into the oil pan. The water and oil met, causing splashes of oil. She only had time to close her eyes as a shadow appeared in front of her. Nian turned his body sideways and protected her in his arms. 10 seconds later, the sound in the oil pan died down. Ning Qing was aware of her situation, and her body stiffened. The man's cold voice sounded above her head. I don't plan to change my wife for the time being. So, Mrs. Nian, you don't have to do such a self-harming thing. Ning Qing raised her head and bumped into his chin. She trembled again, and the heat on her face rushed up. I'm sorry, I ran, I didn't do it on purpose. She stammered as she tried to explain, so embarrassed that she wished she could find a hole to hide in. Nian Lai's indifferent eyes swept over her. He turned around and looked at the fish in the pot. He furrowed his brows slightly. What are you doing? I'm cooking fish, Ning Qing answered honestly, not daring to raise her head. You know how to cook. Ying Luo doesn't really know how to do it. Nian Lai didn't say a word, as if he had been rendered speechless by her. Ning Qing's scalp went numb, and she clutched her sleeves. She couldn't care less. She stepped forward, grabbed his arm, and dragged him out. You go out first. I'll do it. Ning Qing retracted her hand as soon as she touched his strong arm. She still didn't dare to raise her head to look at him. Her wariness made Nian Lai very unhappy. He reached out and turned down the fire. Mrs. Nian, he said, you don't know how to do it, but you're still putting on a brave front. Are you deliberately making me come back to see you act pitiful? Ning Qing lowered her head and did not argue. Nian Lai looked at her small head and thin shoulders. He thought of what the doctor had said, and the darkness in his eyes wavered. Get out, he said coldly. He turned around, his back facing her. Behind him, the footsteps went far away until they could no longer be heard. Nian Yu looked at the bubbling oil in the pot, a self-deprecating smile on his lips. 20 minutes ago, Lu Zhui had secretly sent him a message in the supermarket. Madam is buying groceries. She said she'll go home and cook dinner for you. He didn't believe it at that time. After all, she hated him so much and wanted to run away from him. However, his heart moved at will, and he still pushed back his schedule. When he saw her carefully working in the kitchen, he was so shocked that he almost forgot everything that had happened. However, the truth was that she still did not want to see him. A hint of disappointment flashed across Nian Lai's dark eyes, but it quickly disappeared without a trace. His thin lips were pressed into a straight line. He rolled up his sleeves, picked up a spatula, and turned the fish in the oil. Ning Qing returned at this time. She was holding the ointment that he had applied for her before. She saw him turn around and stand at the door in a daze. She left and returned, her confused and helpless expression, her flustered and evasive gaze, easily piercing into the heart of middle-aged Lai. In that instant, his gaze was too heavy and heavy. There was joy in his surprise. Ning Qing was a little nervous as she slowly walked up to him. I've looked around, but there's no medicine for burns at home. This is the only thing I have. Chapter 49. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He finished all the dishes she made. 1. Translator. 549690339. Your arm is scalded, she reminded him when she saw him holding the spatula and not putting it down. Only then did Nian Lai shift his gaze away from her face and back to his hand. The man's arms looked strong and powerful. His muscles were tight and his lines were perfect. The blue veins were slightly protruding. They did not look greasy, but they did not look too weak either. However, on his originally wheat-colored skin, there were a few red spots that were scalded by hot oil. Ning Qing opened the cap of the ointment and, under his gaze, said, "You take care of it yourself." "Help me," he said. Nian Lai saw the complicated look in her eyes, but he didn't reject her. She silently and obediently applied the medicine for him. After she was done, Ning Qing took a small step back to put some distance between them. "It's done, Dot. You should leave," she said to him. "I can handle this alone." Nian Lai's long and narrow eyes glanced at the pot of oil, as if he was mocking her. "You can do that too. Who was the one who was so scared just now?" Ning Qing's eyes wavered slightly. Nian Lai turned around again and said in a low voice, "What should I do?" She was stunned for a moment. "No, I can do it. If you keep nagging, it won't be able to eat." The man's posture was straight and his back was wide. Under his white shirt, his broad shoulders and strong waist gave people a sense of security. At the same time, the sharp aura on his body was weakened by the surrounding environment, even giving off the illusion that he was approachable. The struggle on Ning Qing's face flashed, but she still went forward. She directed him to pick up the fish, then began to season it and boil the sauce. It was 7 in the evening. At the dining table, sweet and sour carp, braised pork ribs with potatoes, shredded pork with green pepper, and boiled cabbage. It was a typical 4 dishes and 1 soup. Nian Lai and Ning Qing washed their hands and sat at the table. Ning Qing was a little nervous, but she couldn't explain why. Nian Lai, on the other hand, was very calm, as if the atmosphere was supposed to be like this. She looked at him sideways, but he caught her. "What are you looking at me for?" Nian She looked straight ahead, his long fingers holding the chopsticks. "Let's eat." "Oh," Ning Qing said. She watched as he picked up a piece of fish, put it in his mouth, and chewed slowly. "What do you think?" she asked unconfidently. As Nian Lai stared at her face, Ning Qing's hands clenched tightly on her thighs. "Average. The general meaning is that it's not delicious, but it's not bad, right?" Ning Qing heaved a sigh of relief. "That's good." The two of them didn't talk much, and there was only the slight sound of bowls and chopsticks colliding. Out of the corner of his eye, Nian Lai glanced at the woman, who was eating with her head lowered like a kitten. A smile finally appeared on his thin brows. The two of them finished their dinner in silence. While Ning Qing was cleaning up the dishes, Nian Chen went upstairs. Looking at the most empty plate, she thought that he probably especially liked to eat fish. When she returned to her room after cleaning up the kitchen, he was on the phone on the balcony. Ning Qing's footsteps slowed when she heard the words, "Tell her not to make a fuss. I'll go see her tomorrow." Then, she went straight to the bathroom. When she came out of the shower, the man was already half sitting on the bed. The light from the computer shone on his face, obscure and mysterious. Ning Qing pursed her lips and went up from the other side. As soon as she lay down, he turned off the computer, put it aside, and leaned over to her. Ning Qing felt that his kiss this night was different from before. He was gentler and more meticulous. He earnestly and devoutly traced her lips. He opened his dark eyes and stared at her, a ray of light shining in them. Finally, she was seduced and lost her soul, a small ball of fire burning in her heart. It was burning and ticklish, like 10,000 ants biting her heart. She could only press against his chest in a panic and helplessness, maintaining the last of her rationality. The night was getting quieter. Chapter 50. You are listening at novelfull.audio. His Rare Patience and Warmth, 1. Translator 549690339. Ning Qing woke up naturally the next day. Nian Lai was standing in front of the closet, getting dressed. When he turned around, he saw her sleepy eyes. Ning Qing's mind was a little muddled. This was the first time she had woken up, and he was still there. "Morning," she said, blinking her eyes. Nian Jin slowly buttoned his shirt, one button at a time. "Morning." After he fastened it, he chose a tie from the drawer and went to the bed. Ning Qin was still in a daze. "Are you awake?" Nian Lai asked her. She hugged a corner of the blanket and tilted her head. She paused for 3 seconds before she replied, "I'm awake." This posture of waking up in a bad mood was very much like a child's. The frost on Nian Lai's face melted a little. He leaned over and picked her up from the bed. Ning Qin cried out in alarm and wrapped her arms around his neck reflexively, then her face turned red in panic. "What are you doing?" He carried her to the sofa and sat down. She was sitting on his lap, and the heat was burning Ning Qin's restless heart through the thin fabric of his trousers. "Put on my tie," Nian Lai ordered. Ning Qin felt very uncomfortable. She looked at the black tie in his hand and said, "I don't know how to." "I'll teach you. Learn well." He was not in a hurry to go to work so early in the morning, so why did he teach her how to wear a tie? Ning Qin frowned. His sudden patience for her made her feel strange, but at the same time, some other emotions were flowing in her. The man's movements were delicate and elegant. It was as if no matter how complicated something was, it would become simple and beautiful in his hands. His well-defined hands wrapped around his tie step by step, pulled, and pushed, and it was done. It was the Windsor knot. "Have you learned it yet?" Ning Qin was afraid that he would get angry, so she could only nod. "I've learned it." He untied the tie he had just tied and handed it to her. He raised his chin slightly, his eyes were disdainful, and he did not have his usual strong and cold demeanor. "You do it." Looking at his unquestionable expression, Ning Qin knew that she could not refuse, so she could only bite the bullet. She put the tie around his neck, her slender fingers moving nimbly. Because she was nervous, her fingers touched his Adam's apple from time to time when she curled them. This made Ning Qin even more anxious, and she quickly tied it. "It's done." Nian Lai saw that her hand gesture didn't seem like a newbie's at all. His eyes darted around a few times before he finally said, "Not bad." Ning Qin felt a little guilty and nodded her head. Her father worked as a civilian staff, and she knew how to put on a tie since she was a child. She said she didn't know how to do it because she didn't want to let Nian Yu do it. Nian Lai picked her up and placed her back on the bed. Ning Qin lay down and pulled the blanket over herself. Her eyes that were left outside blinked and blinked. Nian Qi's hands, which were by her face, tightened. He suppressed the urge to kiss her. "Sleep a little longer," he said gently. "All right," he said. He straightened his upper body and went out. Ning Qin heaved an inexplicable sigh of relief. Hearing the sound of the car leaving downstairs, she rolled out of bed, her eyes becoming decisive and determined. She had something very important to verify. Ning Qin found her phone and made a call. She was a little nervous, but the phone rang many times and no one picked up even when it hung up automatically. She tried a few times, but no one picked up. Thus, she could only wash up in a hurry, dress up, and go out. At the entrance of the hospital, Ning Qin looked up at the tall building and walked in. At the same time, in the meeting room of the Nian Corporation. Under the gazes of all the higher-ups, Nianing raised his hand to stop the meeting, signaling Lu Chao to come forward. Lu Zhui walked up to him and whispered something into his ear. The temperature of the man's body suddenly dropped, and his dark eyes were so deep that no one could see through him.